Hola, cage fighting connoisseurs. This is KidNativeBloodyElbow.com, joined by Zane Simon for the post-fight show. Sixth round of UFC on Fox 22, Waterson versus Vanzant, or Vanzant versus Waterson, whatever it was the place where hype goes to die, if I can steal from Dwayne Finley of Bleacher Report. Mickey Gall beats Sage Northcutt. Michelle Waterson beats Paige Vanzant. It's a beautiful thing for those of us who hate hype thrust upon young, undeserving fighters. What can I say?
Yeah, I mean the UFC's getting a full backlash for trying to scout talent from a like off the cuff, quick and easy kind of way. The whole looking for a fight show, and just I think it's kind of indicative. I don't even know that it's necessarily a WME IMG thing, because obviously Sage and Paige were before them, but I think it's a Dana White thing of like executives looking for the flashiest, highlight reelest, GQ
widest
cover photo fighters they can find.
Yeah, the widest, prettiest, non-controversialist showboats that they can get. And you know, I really have no beef with Paige Vanzant. I think she's a gritty fighter. I think she's tough. I think she's just been pushed too hard. Like, she's just a middle of the pack fighter. I don't see her being a superstar in any way, shape, or form ever. And here she is headlining a fight card on Fox. And as for Sage Northcutt, I think the kid has the talent, the physical athleticism, and a solid base in one martial art that needs to be expanded dramatically. And he doesn't have like the massive left hand of Conor McGregor or anything like that. He doesn't have a killer weapon that you know, Conor McGregor's obviously got limitations and has allegedly, you know, probably been protected from wrestlers throughout his career, but he can also beat some of them and has that killer punch, whereas Sage does not. And it was just sweet.
Well,
what can I say?
I mean, it's important to know for that. I mean, Conor McGregor spent 5 years on the regional European circuit getting tapped out by a couple of mediocre grapplers that nobody gives a crap about, and beating dudes and getting confident and learning all the tools of the trade. You know, he didn't just start out 1 year in being Conor McGregor.
It's true.
The way we know him now.
Yeah, and I think the UFC has rushed Sage Northcutt. This is his second loss in the UFC, two losses in his last 3 fights. And, you know, Mickey Gall is another kid that's been rushed, but this is a kid who seized the moment. You know, he beat CM Punk, called out Sage Northcutt, beat Sage Northcutt, and now, I mean, kid's a pretty big name now. This hats off to Mickey Gall. I mean, I still don't have any confidence he's going to amount to anything in the UFC welterweight division, but he's made a name for himself.
I think the thing is, for fighters like Gall and Northcutt, is it's all about how much can they keep their confidence in their style and in their ability while taking some bad losses. And for Sage, I think he came out as this like blitzing, laser fast, just out of the gate, run you over fighter. And as he's had trouble with really a bunch of, he's faced a bunch of much more experienced but underwhelming athletic vets. And as he's had trouble with them, he's lost a lot of confidence in that. He's now playing a more careful game, a more crafty range game. And frankly, he doesn't have the tools to back that up. He's not a great defensive fighter. He's still a bad grappler. He's still not a great defensive wrestler. And for Gall, he's not a great striker. He can be hit hard and cracked. And he's going to have to face some dudes that can hurt him. And, if he gets knocked out once or twice, or if he loses a couple of bad decisions, it's all about how much confidence does he retain in what he does well going forward.
And if Dan Hardy has anything left of what we used to see from Dan Hardy, that's going to be a painful lesson for Mr. Gall.
Yeah, it could absolutely be. I don't know that they make that fight. I think, it seems like a matchup with somebody like Randy Brown would make a lot more sense.
But if you're a promoter, there's a certain amount of mojo to Mickey Gall that's not going to last.
It's
And
true.
so you want to squeeze that washcloth while it's still wet,
I
while
mean,
there's some
that's the reason
finish.
we got Gall Northcutt is
Yeah.
because
And
they're
then
looking
also
to.
they figured that Northcutt would beat Gall. I mean, I stole my pre-fight analysis from Patrick Wyman, who was like basically like, look, I got to pick Northcutt because he's actually beat somebody that's a professional caliber fighter, whereas Gall hadn't up to this
And you
point.
didn't steal it from me, who said that Gall was going to take Northcutt down and choke him out.
Your show was too long, and also you do your show after I do mine. So,
Well,
if you would
but
have tweeted something pithy,
I,
then I would have stolen it. But
I also picked Michelle Waterson, or I picked Paige Van Zant to beat Michelle Waterson. So what the fuck do I
and
know?
what was your thinking there?
I thought that I've seen Michelle Waterson get bullied too much by women a lot smaller than Paige Van Zant or a lot less athletic. I thought that she struggled with Angela Magana and her pressure game, and Magana is one of the least athletic women in the division. And then she got choked out and out scrambled by a 4'11" pretty raw talent in Herrick DiPercio. So I figured Van Zant, or for Waterson, I just haven't seen her look great
And I feel
in the
like
UFC.
that if Van Zant had fought like Paige Van Zant, you would have been right. But she was trying to do, I don't know what she was doing, but she was not fighting like Paige Van Zant, which is get in your face, mix it up, make it a lot of scrambles. Let's see who's really the toughest chick
She
in the
really
cage.
wants to fight as pretty as I think there's an expectation because you see Paige Van Zant, she's this very pretty face. She's got this, she's a great dancer and all this. So people are like, oh, she's going to be this really beautiful, live, dynamic fighter. And
Yeah,
she
like a
came out. She
female
was
Anderson Silva or something, and she is not.
yes, and
She's
she's
a,
trying to live up to that.
a very small female Randy Couture at her best. I mean, she's
Yeah.
she's got an ugly fighting style, and she wandered away from her game, and Waterson capitalized pretty quickly.
Well, I don't even know if it would have mattered as much for that. The way Waterson hit that head and arm throw and just totally caught Paige Van Zant off guard and was immediately on her back with the arm under the neck. Like, that transition was some ridiculously slick shit from Michelle Waterson. And
Yeah.
I don't know that under any style would have been ready for it.
You're quite true, but had she, yeah, I mean, but if you're pressuring your opponent and you're hurting them, they're much less likely to pull off something that's slick. But what can you say? Waterson fought a great fight. Brian Stann was screaming, or not screaming, but saying that, we lost a star, but we gained a star, Michelle Waterson, but she's not going to be Paige Van Zant. I'm sorry. Not that Paige was
As a
really
star?
yeah. I mean,
No, I mean, if that were the case, then, Brian Barberena would have been rocking it up this card after beating Sage Northcutt and Warley Alves. It just doesn't work that way.
No.
And it sucks. But I mean, if Waterson were going to be a star, she would have come in as one. She's already been a champ. She's already somebody people like and they know, and she's exciting, and she's been around a long time. It's just she doesn't grab people. Maybe this will change with a big headlining spot on Fox, but
I doubt it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I way doubt it. But
She's a fan favorite. She's a hardcore fan favorite.
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
different than being a big, saleable, massive star.
Yes, a very, very different thing. But it's nothing to sneeze at. I mean,
No.
The UFC in the peak of the Zuffa era had a whole roster of hardcore fan favorites and really no massive stars, and they did very, very well. It's when they got hooked on the crack of massive stars that things started to fall apart, and also watering down cards and just
I mean, the first thing that led to that was getting hooked on watering down cards to the point that their credit rating got slashed, and then they were like, "Oh, actually, we do need a few stars."
Yeah, that's a much better way to put it. But speaking of stars, we saw Uriah Faber's final fight. He beat Brad Pickett, unanimous decision, 30-26 on all three cards. Pickett did knock him down in the final round, but otherwise it was all Faber. Totally. A classic.
They showed in the replay that the punch that Pickett landed caught Faber in the shoulder. He was up on one foot. It wasn't really a knockdown. It was knocked him over.
A knockover, not a knockdown. And I mean, they pretty much picked Brad Pickett, who at one time was a pretty dangerous fighter, but who's been pretty shot for a while. And it was a showcase fight for Faber in his hometown, and richly deserved for a guy who never wore a UFC championship belt. he was the king of the featherweight division before there was a UFC featherweight division. He did more to build featherweight and bantamweight probably than any other fighter, just through his series of UFC title challenges alone. He became an opponent to numerous UFC champions: Jose Aldo, Dominic Cruz, probably the two biggest who beat him, Michael Brown. And, I think he had a Hall of Fame career, personally.
Well, there's something to be said for being a bigger name than just about every champion in the division that you're fighting for as long as you're fighting in those divisions. Like, you could argue that Dominic Cruz and Uriah Faber are on a pretty equal level in terms of stardom as sports, as like headliners. But beyond that, I mean, Faber was a bigger name than Hanan Barrow when Barrow was champ, bigger name than TJ Dillashaw when Dillashaw was champ.
Bigger
Like,
name than Jose Aldo.
yeah, and Mike Brown, bigger name than Mike Brown when Mike Brown took the belt. Like,
Yeah.
Faber he has managed to stake out a claim as being the most famous fighter in his divisions, no matter even if he was the best.
Yeah. And the thing is, though, he was the best for a long time and is the lineal ancestor of the modern UFC featherweight champion. I mean, the WEC title that Faber held for a long time became the UFC belt with no change. So I basically consider him a UFC champ. I mean, it was just a sort of cruel matter of timing that he lost the belt a couple years before. I guess it was about 3 years before those divisions moved over to the UFC. But yeah, a great career for Faber, and one of the guys that I think had a really fun style, a classic submission wrestler. I mean, he was really good at wrestling, and he was really good at submissions, and at his best, it made for a lot of really fast-paced, fun fights.
Yeah, I mean, he built a whole camp and a whole style around him that is indicative of like Uriah Faber, the fighter. That is very much team alpha male. It's all, they've gotten better at striking over time, but for a long time it was a bunch of wrestle grapplers who had this very set. I mean, there's an alpha male takedown style, which is, this power double into an instant sub attempt, usually from a front headlock series, and if you don't get it, let him up, punch him on the way up, then shoot for another takedown, go for another instant sub, let him up, punch him on the way up, and it's just like reset. And it was this alpha male style that has worked and is made for exciting fights, and it was geared for fun fights, and it's been a staple of the team for years.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And also, Faber, unlike so many people, not going to mention any names like John Jones, was not a fuck up. Like, the guy was a star and he could handle it, and he made a lot of money for the organization. He made a lot of money for his sponsors. He, to my knowledge, hasn't done anything to disgrace himself in a 15-year or 13-year MMA career. That's saying something.
Yeah, there's a little cult vibe there. He's got the whole like,
dude has a butt chin too, but what are you gonna do about it?
Yeah, like, and martial arts is full of cult vibe. I'm not gonna like get too down on a guy if he wants to have a compound like gym where everything funnels money into him. That's kind of far.
Yeah, I mean, you can't judge him by like normal people standards or what you think of him if he was your father-in-law. But you
have to judge him by fighter standards, which means like, has he beat any old ladies? Has he?
Not a one that I know of. Not a DWI arrest to my knowledge, or nothing. No sexting scandals, nothing. Just a clean slate and a great career, and it was pretty cool to see him send off. I thought it was a pretty good send off, letting him do it in his hometown, against basically a handpicked opponent, although a credible and respectable one. And Brad Pickett, no shame in being Brad Pickett. I mean, the guy had a pretty solid career, and at his peak was a really, really tough bantamweight.
Yeah, Pickett, I mean, he's a fun action fighter, and it just sucks for him. Like, he made his name as a guy who could walk through all sorts of punishment and still implement this really scrappy boxing wrestling game. And as he can't walk through punishment as well anymore, it's that really has put him on hard times. But it's still, I mean, he's still well-rounded. He's still fun. He can still get in there and mix it up with people. It's just, he gets dropped.
It's just at his age and with what we know about CT and brain trauma, there's really no reason for him to continue. And we don't necessarily approve of media hacks like ourselves calling on fighters to retire, but retire, dude. That's all I got to say.
Your
And then in
position.
the opener of the main card, Alan Juban beat Mike Perry in a pretty good scrap, went the full distance. Pretty back and forth, but I thought Juban outclassed him pretty easily.
Yeah, and that if Perry didn't knock Joban out, that was the way this fight was going to go. It's
Yeah.
impressive how well Perry did fighting off the back foot for a lot because it's tough to implement a high output kicking game when you're moving backwards constantly. But Perry did a good job, or I mean, Joban did a good job, and for Perry, this is just one of those lessons he's going to have to learn, and it'll say a lot about his ability to develop as a prospect, how he does going forward, because he doesn't have the greatest camp behind him. He's
No.
not training with a bunch of other great fighters or at a big gym. So it's going to be a lot indicative of his natural ability and his ability to take lessons and grow. Or maybe you learn, hey, I need to switch camps and start switching camps.
That would be my advice for Mr. Perry. And as for Juban, I mean, he survived a pretty tough challenge because Perry's right hand, which was cocked and loaded the whole time,
Yeah.
um, and he managed to evade that danger and not just outpoint the guy, but
He hurt him.
hey,
He dropped Perry. He hurt him.
yeah,
He did work. It was a good fight. And as Perry got less mobile in the third round, Joban started pot shotting, started marching forward, started being the one dictating the fight. So it was just a good, solid performance from Joban to prove that as an action fighter, you actually do have to have a style to beat him. You can't just be an athletic phenom who has a really raw game. You actually have to have a plan to beat Alan Joban.
yeah. And where does he go from here? Like he's
For
just
Joban,
yeah, he's a middle of the pack, 35-year-old UFC welterweight.
I still think he's just an action fighter. He's somebody you put on main cards and win or lose, he's going to show up for a great fight. Other, people who have the right style to beat him are probably still going to beat him, but if you don't have that right style, Joban will show up and put a good fight, put together a good fight. He'll win fights, and if he gets enough of the right matchups, he may go on a run, Matt Brown style, and suddenly find himself a top 5 welterweight. I
I
don't know
think
that
that's
I
wildly
would pick him
optimistic.
to go on a title run.
Yeah, no, I don't see that either. All right, let's go from the bottom of the card up from here on. The 3 fights on UFC Fight Pass. First up, welterweight Sultan Aliyev beat Bohan Velikovic. Split decision. Not that fun of a fight.
Nah, Aliev Vilishkovic is just a little too jack of all trades, master of none, and he's struggling against fighters in the UFC who actually have a deep skill set in one area.
Yeah, and that was Aliyev. And then flyweight Hector Sandoval beat Freddie Serrano, unanimous decision. Uh, Thoughts on that one?
Kind of the exact opposite problem for Serrano in that he's really good at only one thing, which is wrestling in a division that does not reward wrestling that heavily flyweight because everybody scrambles too well and is too fast and is too hard to get a hold of. And Sandoval outpointed him. Serrano, unfortunately, just came to MMA a little too late, which is sad to see because his wrestling is great and he's an
Yeah.
obvious freak athlete, but there are only so many Yoel Romeros in the world.
And that is a really unforgiving division. Those
Yeah.
guys, those little dudes are fast and tough. And then in the featured fight on the Fight Pass card, bantamweight Eddie Wineland knocked out Takeya Mizugaki in the first round. Really impressive performance from Wineland because Mizugaki is not an easy out.
Yeah, Mizugaki's trending into Brad Pickett territory, though.
This
Another
is
guy
true.
who's always had the chin and been like, okay, I can fight through fire. He's got sharp boxing and he can mix it up everywhere. And that chin's going, and he's not the best athlete. So
Yeah, he's lost 4 out of
hit.
5, and 3 of those being knockout losses. So yeah, probably is time to jump off the Mizugaki bandwagon. But it was fun while it lasted. He's had a good run in the UFC bantamweight division, and it just seemed like tonight he's a 1-2 punch guy, and he was only landing the one, and some of that is on Wineland. He was moving and making it very hard for Mizugaki to land his combinations, and Wineland just has killer power.
Yeah, I'm just really glad to see Wineland putting on a run. If we're gonna see some aged vets fight each other, Wineland's a fun action fighter that I'm happy to see still go after it. He hasn't lost his chin. He is still got his power. He may be a step slower than he was, but he was blazingly fast before, so he can afford to be a small step slower.
Yeah.
And he's still a fun action fighter. He's the kind of dude, like I say, it's kind of like the same thing with Alan Jouban. You might have the right style to beat Eddie Wineland, but he's going to show up and put on a fun fight every single time.
Yeah, and for a guy who was the WEC bantamweight champ, 10 years ago, he's
Yeah.
only 32 years old.
Yeah.
And so, it is fun to see him putting on a run. And so, look forward to his next fight. Any thoughts on who his next fight should be?
Uh, I kind of want to see him staying on like the old fighters who have been around a while. Somebody like, Ronnie Yaya is another guy trying to put on a run.
Yaya would be a good fight for Wineland. It would not be such a good fight for Ronnie Yaya.
Yeah, it may not be, but at the same time, too, there's some guys rising up looking for a spot in the division that could make a fun action fight for Wineland. And you get somebody like Felipe Aranches or somebody like that who is another fun action fighter. Guys who can go in there and mix it up, put on a striking performance. That's the kind of thing I want to see.
Yeah, that sounds fun. And then in the opener, the Fox Sports 1 prelims, which I felt like the Fox Sports 1 prelims between all but one of the fights go into decision and Fox Sports 1, that really dragged the card down a little bit. But it's early, and the Fox main card was fast and action-packed. So I've kind of forgiven and forgotten about the Fox Sports 1
Well,
prelim.
so many of the fights were really, I think, like the problem really came for Covington Barberena being slow and not terrible, and then that Cole Miller fight just being really depressing. And by that time, suddenly it was like the fact no finishes and a slow fight and then a depressing fight, and you're just like, oh god, this is starting to drag a little.
Yeah. It made for a long middle of the card. But it opened up with Leslie Smith and Irene Aldana. Smith took the unanimous decision, women's bantamweight fight. This was a pretty good scrap. I mean, it was good action. It didn't come to a conclusion, but Smith clearly dominated the action.
Yeah, I think it's the best performance of Leslie Smith's career, honestly. It's certainly her best performance. I mean, even with a stoppage win over Jessamine Duke not that long ago, back in 2014, which is still a little while ago, I still would say this might be the best performance from Smith since 2013. Maybe.
It could well be, and Aldana was somebody that people were telling me not to sleep on, and had a little bit of hype coming into this fight. So impressive win for Smith. Then you had lightweight Josh Emmett and Scott Holzman. Emmett won a unanimous decision. This was a fun fight too. This was a good scrap. I mean, there wasn't a lot of polish on this diamond, but there was a lot of hurt.
It was a bananas fight. Like, seriously, I don't know how those dudes fought at the pace they did for as long as they did. I expected it to be back and forth, but I also expected somebody to get knocked out because they both have a habit of the guys who like to stay way outside and jump into the pocket and then unload like 2 or 3 hard bombs and then get back out and do it again. And you can't fight that long like that without hurting bad. And
by the third round, it was more like Walking Dead than really a UFC fight.
But it was a great, fun fight. Yeah. I loved that fight.
Yeah, that was a fun fight. If you didn't watch it, that's one to watch on Fight Pass later on. Then you had welterweight Alex Morono beat James Muntazeri, unanimous decision. Some decent action in there, but this is where the wheels started to fall off the card for me. I mean, it just...
That's more of a sloppy fight that just is like... It's fun still, but you really notice how sloppy it is.
Yeah, exceedingly sloppy. And then you get to welterweight Colby Covington dominating Brian Barberena, who is a guy previously to beat Sage Northcutt. Covington just wrestle mugged him.
Yep. And I mean, Covington, he won the striking exchanges for most of the early part of the fight, too. I mean, I think it's a great performance from Covington. Barberena's tough as hell and, and did an amazing job getting up. Like, you got to give Barberena credit for every time he got taken down. He was right back up.
Yeah, he definitely was. Game and gritty guy, but just the skill quotient was all on Covington's side.
Yep.
And he didn't care if it was entertaining or not. He was there to get the win, and he got it. And then you had featherweight Mizuto Hirota beat Cole Miller. Like you say, a very depressing fight. Cole Miller gave a bunch of depressing interviews before this bout saying things like, I literally don't care about this fight. I'm so bummed about the whole situation with the new ownership and my position in life, my career, and everything else. So I was totally expecting Cole Miller to lose. And Hirota dominated, but didn't really do anything spectacular.
Yeah, I was really hoping that Miller would show up and work hard and work his way to a win, and we'd all have like, because Hirota's just not an exciting fighter, and I figured if Hirota can't like push Miller, then Miller may not fold. But Miller could only fight. He only looked like he was motivated for about 20 seconds of fighting at any one time. And the moment
Yeah,
those 20 seconds were up, he would just like, fuck it, I don't really care. I'll just
yeah.
fall over and pull guard and put my hands up and try and mitigate damage until this round's over.
Yeah, it was just pretty depressing. And then you had Paul Craig beat Luis Henrique de Silva, armbar submission in the second round. This was a pretty fun fight. I mean, this
Yeah.
livened things up a little bit, and I was impressed by Craig's performance.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what he can do in the UFC. He's certainly big enough and durable enough, which are like the two mainstay things you have to be for light heavyweight. And he's got a fun submission game off his back. There's not a lot of great submission artists at light heavyweight. We're starting to get a few more with dudes like Misha Serkinov coming in, but it'll be interesting to see how many times Craig can pull guard on people and then throw up an armbar, and if that's something that'll work for a lot longer for him in his
Yeah,
UFC run.
and did they mention his nickname on the air? The
Bear
Bear
Jew,
Jew.
yeah,
Yeah, like I've been amused by the nickname as long as I've been aware of the dude, and yeah,
well,
I
it's
don't know.
an
I'm
Inglorious
skeptical.
Bastards thing, right?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is, and I'm I'm very skeptical though of a submission heavy guy at the light heavyweight division. I think you're just going to run into some monsters who are just going to be. I laugh at your submissions and I hit you in the face with 220 pounds of terror. But he beat De Silva, which no joke, and so pretty good performance. But back to the main event and the main and co-main, Paige and Sage. Just this is the most fun I've had hate watching something since I convinced my wife Downton Abbey sucked. It was uh, just beautiful. I mean, I was cheering the screen. I had no pretense of journalistic objectivity, which I never have made. But yeah, seeing Sage Northcutt lose, it's really unfair to the kid. He's a young guy, and it's not his fault they're pushing him this hard.
No, he's a nice kid. Like I've never seen anything out of him that seems anything other than nice and open and friendly.
Yeah, and really is an amazing athlete. I mean, the
Yeah.
leaps and the twirls and everything he does, and like I say, it's on Dana White and the Zuffa management that are mismanaging the kid. They're pushing him too hard, too fast, and that is one of the oldest ways to fuck up a fighter that there is. If you really care about a fighter and their future, you do not rush them into the spotlight like this, and you let them build and grow and put a series of successively greater challenges in front of him. And it's not like they've really thrown him in the deep end. It's
No,
just
I mean Mickey Gall was 3-0 over three fighters who were 0-3 all against Mickey Gall.
yes. Yep, but hats off to Mickey Gall. I mean,
Yeah.
he's won 2 fights in a big spotlight for a kid with no experience to speak of, and a pretty limited skill set. And so, like you
He's
say,
got the confidence on his side right now, and Northcutt's just not getting better enough at the things that he's bad at. Like that was the reason that I was picking Gall going in. It's like I realized there's this massive experience gap between them, but like much worse athletes than Northcutt with bad takedown games are taking him down and putting him in bad submission positions. And Gall is going to be absolutely confident about rushing in there and taking him down. And when
yep,
you're confident like that, when you're not scared of anything, when you're not worried about it, because you're young and inexperienced, then you can get big wins, better wins than people expect out of you.
yep. So good performance by Mickey Gall, and honestly, I think the best thing they could do for Sage Northcutt is cut him from the UFC and let him go out in the wilderness. They're not going to do it. I predict they're going to keep going back to this and completely ruin the kid before they finally cut him.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. It's Sage's UFC career could get very weird if they are dead set on holding on to him and then trying to figure out how to match make him going forward. And especially if his camp doesn't improve, then it could just be an undertrained young kid continually getting thrown challenges that people expect him to win and failing, and
Yeah,
just this really Schadenfreude heavy like
yeah.
experience.
There's that it sucks for Sage. And then Paige Van Zant. I don't know that there's any big stakes coming out of this. I don't expect. It's not like either of these people are going to be threatening Joanna Champion at any point.
Yeah, I don't see that either. But Waterson, at least this puts her on the path to a title shot.
Yeah,
That's the good news for
which
her.
she would lose badly, but it's a good thing to get.
Yeah,
And for Paige Van Zant, I mean, you know, she's a journeyman fighter. I think there's really no shame in that. I think she's going to win some, lose some, and it's just sort of unfortunate that the UFC has pushed her so hard, really kind of beyond. I mean, to me, she's like the second coming of Felice Herrig. She's a fighter with some charisma and not
I
that great
mean,
a skill
there's a
set.
reason that she beat Felice Herrig, though. I
Well,
mean,
sure, but Herrig was pretty advanced in age by the time they met up.
what?
I think so. I think
No,
Herrig's been fighting forever.
been fighting. That's the trick with women's MMA. Herrig has not been fighting half as long as people think has. Herrig is 32. Started fighting in 2009.
But that's a long time ago. It's 2016. That's 7 years ago. And
Yeah, like she should be in the prime. Felice Herrig should be in the absolute prime of her career right now.
it's true. It's true. But and I'm just saying, I don't think that Paige Van Zant has any higher a ceiling than Felice Herrig.
Nah, I think Paige Van Zant's going to be a consistent top 10 fighter in the division. It's just consistent top 10, not consistent top 5.
Yeah, maybe you're right. You're
Herrig
probably
is
right. I mean, what do
more
I know?
like
But
edges of 15.
yeah, and it's just weird to me. It just says everything about where the UFC is right now. That they're putting this fight. That these are the two fights they're headlining on Fox with. The idea behind the whole Fox deal was that you would build pay-per-view stars by featuring them on broadcast television, which has not panned out, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, they're working on it. I think this was a closer step than maybe they've been in the past, where they were actually just shipping a few pay-per-view stars down to Fox to see if they could pull ratings.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. This at least you could see a game plan here.
Yeah,
with an upside, with potential on the upside, but everything went wrong. I wish I could hear Ari Emanuel and Dana White talking about this card after the. I wish I could hear what they're saying.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what kind of ratings it did. That's the thing to me is how big a draws are Paige and Sage. If people were like, "Oh, Uriah Faber should be headlining this thing," it's like, I mean, Uriah Faber is a super hardcore fan favorite fighter.
Yeah,
and he was a bigger draw than most for the lower weight divisions, but he's never been like, a really drive your traffic kind of star at any point.
And definitely not on broadcast television. I'm not expecting this thing to do jack for TV ratings. It doesn't have a bunch of competition tonight. I mean, it's a pretty dead point before the college bowl game madness starts, but
I wouldn't be surprised if it did a lot better than people expect. I wouldn't be surprised if Paige and Sage connect better to casual fans than they do to hardcore fans in a way that is exactly what the UFC wants out of cards like this.
Maybe you're right. We will find out. And so anything else we need to cover on this fight card?
I think we've covered it.
I think we have too. So subscribe to MMANation.com on YouTube and MMA Nation on iTunes. Get the audio without the ugly. Follow us on Twitter at KidNate, at the Zane Simon. Read us on BloodyElbow.com. Is that all my plugs?
There's no UFC show next week, but we'll be back with Knuckle Up coming up at you tomorrow, and If I Did It, and we'll be doing an MMA Depressed Us again, watching some of history's worst fights.
Yep.
And all that good stuff. So
and then we'll
still be
getting ready for UFC 207 on December 30th, the following week, with Ronda Rousey's return against Nunez. So, yeah, and I'm expecting Amanda Nunez to wreck Ronda Rousey, but we will see.
Will be interesting days,
no doubt. So that's our show. Thanks, Zane Simon, Adios MMA aficionados. We'll see you next time.